The European Union is dying, not with a bang, but with a whimper. It is a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts inflicted not by an external enemy, but by its own hand. The continent is a house consumed by an internal fire, and its leaders are furiously arguing over the color of the curtains. While facing unprecedented challenges, an economy gasping for air, a transatlantic partner veering into unpredictable protectionism, and the specter of a wider war erupting in the Middle East, the EU is paralyzed, crippled by a profound, soul-deep division over the one crisis that should have united it, the war in Ukraine. Some member states, driven by a mixture of historical fear and moral conviction, demand more money, more weapons for Kiev, and a final crushing set of sanctions against Moscow. But a growing chorus from within, a rebellion of the pragmatic and the cynical, is now screaming that they will not spend a single penny more on what they see as a bottomless pit. The European project, once a beacon of hope and unity, is fracturing before our eyes. At the heart of this internal collapse is the desperate, almost pathetic attempt to implement an 18th sanctions package against Russia. The 18th, a number that in itself is an admission of failure. The goal is to force Moscow to accept an unconditional 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, a precondition for what the West naively calls serious peace talks. This package is being hailed as the largest, most comprehensive ever imposed. The President of the European Commission, with a brave face that barely conceals her panic, has declared that it will target the two pillars of the Russian state, energy and banking. The details are a laundry list of economic warfare. 77 more oil tankers added to a blacklist, 22 more Russian banks expelled from the SWIFT international payment system, a wider ban on financial operators in third countries who dare to fund trade with Russia, restrictions on machinery, metals, plastics, the very building blocks of industry, a clampdown on dual-use goods, the components of weapons and drones, 22 more companies, both Russian and foreign, accused of feeding the Russian war machine. And then comes the symbolic, almost theatrical gesture. For the first time, a proposal to prohibit any European business from engaging in any transaction related to the Nord Stream pipelines. The pipelines that once represented a future of German-Russian energy symbiosis, now a monument to a dead dream. Nord Stream 1 is already damaged, a victim of a mysterious subsea explosion. Nord Stream 2 was never even turned on. This is not a practical measure. It is a desperate attempt to perform a definitive public exorcism of the past. The package also seeks to lower the price cap on Russian seaborne oil from $60 to a crippling $45 a barrel. It aims to ban the import of refined products made from Russian crude, a belated attempt to close a loophole that has been hemorrhaging sanctions for months. But this grand strategy, this final, mighty blow, designed to bring the Russian bear to its knees, is facing a mutiny from within the EU's own ranks. The primary rebels are Slovakia and Hungary, nations that see this economic holy war not as a moral crusade, but as an act of suicidal self-immolation. They argue, with a logic that is infuriating to Brussels, but undeniable to their own citizens, that cutting off Russian energy supplies will destroy their own energy security and inflict unbearable costs on their people. The Slovakian Prime Minister, Robert Fico, has been brutally blunt. He has declared he will not support any measures targeting Russian revenue unless the European Commission can provide a practical, immediate solution to the catastrophic crisis his country would face from a complete halt of Russian gas, oil, and nuclear fuel. He is, in essence, telling Brussels, "You will not force us to commit economic suicide." Hungary's Viktor Orban, the perennial thorn in the EU's side, has repeatedly threatened to veto any further sanctions on Russian energy. His country is shackled to two pipelines that bring Russian oil and gas. Complying with the EU's plan would sever one, forcing Hungary to rely on a route through Croatia that charges transit fees 5 times the European average. It is economic blackmail, and Orban will not stand for it. But then came the truly unexpected defection, the crack in the wall that could bring the whole edifice down. For the first time, Austria, a nation at the heart of Europe, publicly mused about the possibility of resuming Russian gas imports once a peace agreement is reached. Before the war, 80% of Austria's gas came from Russia, locked in through long-term contracts. This was not a threat, it was a statement of future intent, a signal that some in Europe are already planning for a post-sanctions world. A world where economic reality trumps political solidarity. The rebellion is real. Hungary's foreign minister confirmed that his country, along with Slovakia, jointly blocked the adoption of the sanctions package. They have thrown a wrench into the gears of the EU's war machine, and Hungary has gone even further, declaring a complete halt to all aid for Ukraine, vowing that not a single cent of Hungarian taxpayers' money will be sent to Kyiv. This move will severely, perhaps fatally, complicate the EU's efforts to keep Ukraine afloat. The EU's crusade is not just being undermined from within, it is being ridiculed from without. Even the United States, or at least the version of it represented by former President Trump, sees the sanctions as a self-defeating folly. Trump has openly stated that such measures primarily harm the US, costing it billions, even tens of billions of dollars. He understands a simple truth that seems to have eluded the idealists in Brussels. Sanctions are a double-edged sword, and this sword is cutting deep into Europe's own flesh. The brutal reality is that the sanctions are not working. Russia is not crippled. Russia is adapting. It is a hydra, cutting off one head only for two more to grow in its place. Russia is quietly but effectively replumbing the entire global energy landscape. It has found willing partners who are more interested in profit than in politics. India is now gleefully buying up discounted Russian crude oil, refining it in its massive coastal refineries, and then selling the finished gasoline and diesel back to the European market at a handsome profit. In the last 3 years, India's exports of these refined products to Europe have nearly doubled. Europe is funding Russia's war machine through an Indian middleman, a tragic farce of geopolitical incompetence. Russia has also cultivated a new powerful alliance with Saudi Arabia. Exports of Russian heavy oil products to the kingdom have increased sixfold in 4 years. Russia has found a new market for the sludgy bottom of its oil barrel, allowing Saudi Arabia to keep its own valuable crude for export while running its refineries at full capacity on cheap Russian feedstock. This is not just a commercial arrangement, it is a strategic partnership between two of the world's oil superpowers, a new axis of energy that is explicitly designed to circumvent Western sanctions. The impact of the sanctions is diminishing with every passing day, and the blowback on Europe is devastating. In 2024, the EU's economy is projected to grow by a pathetic 1%. Russia's economy, the economy that was supposed to be in tatters, is growing at a stunning 4.1%, many times higher than the average of the developed world. The EU is strangling itself while Russia thrives. But the true horror, the secret that is being whispered in the corridors of power from Brussels to Berlin, is that this failure is not just an accident. It is a deliberate, engineered demolition. The divisions within the EU are not just a product of differing economic interests. They are being actively cultivated and weaponized by a force that no one dares to name. A deep state faction within Russia's intelligence services, a shadowy directorate known only as Molniya or Lightning, has moved beyond traditional espionage. They have developed a new form of warfare, a weapon that targets not infrastructure but the very consciousness of a society. Project Molniya is a sophisticated AI-driven psychological warfare platform. It does not just create fake news, it creates customized, individually tailored realities. It scours the digital footprint of every single citizen in a target country, their social media posts, their online purchases, their private messages, their political donations. It builds a detailed psychological profile identifying their deepest fears, their latent prejudices, and their core anxieties. Then it begins to feed them a constant drip feed of information designed to amplify those fears. For a Hungarian citizen worried about energy prices, Molniya floods their feed with terrifying and subtly exaggerated stories of German families freezing in the dark. For a Slovakian factory worker, it creates hyper-realistic deepfake videos of their CEO admitting that EU sanctions will force the closure of their plant. For a German environmentalist, it pushes fabricated scientific papers proving that a prolonged war is a greater threat to the climate than Russian gas. This is not propaganda, this is cognitive insurgency. Molniya's most advanced tool is a predictive algorithm that can model the emotional contagion of ideas. It can predict with terrifying accuracy which combination of narratives released into which specific social networks at which precise time will create the maximum possible political polarization. It knows that a false story about Ukrainian refugees receiving extravagant benefits, if introduced into a specific German town's Facebook group at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, will lead to a protest that will be covered by the local news, which will then be amplified by right-wing influencers, eventually forcing a local politician to make a statement that fractures their party's unity. They are not just reporting the news. They are architecting it. The divisions in the EU are not organic. They are a symphony of chaos, and Molniya is the conductor. The unexpected defection of Austria was not unexpected to them. They had been grooming key Austrian business leaders and politicians for months with a targeted campaign emphasizing the economic pragmatism of Russian gas. They are playing a multi-dimensional chess game while the EU is still trying to figure out how the pieces move. The ultimate goal of Molniya is not just to break the EU's support for Ukraine, it is to trigger a cascade of sovereignty, a chain reaction where member states, driven by an artificial but intensely felt sense of national crisis, begin to unilaterally dismantle the Union from within. The goal is to make the EU not just fail, but to make it devour itself. The sanctions package, the arguments over aid, these are just the battlefields they have chosen. The real weapon is the poisoned information that is turning neighbor against neighbor, nation against nation. Imagine the final act. As the EU remains paralyzed, Molniya launches its masterpiece. It creates a deep-fake video, so perfect it is undetectable, of the European Commission president in a private conversation, admitting that the sanctions were a mistake and that she secretly believes Ukraine cannot win. The video is leaked to a network of sympathetic journalists and populist politicians across the continent. The political firestorm is instantaneous and uncontrollable. Governments collapse. Pro-EU leaders are forced to resign. In the ensuing chaos, a wave of nationalist anti-EU parties, all of whom have been secretly cultivated and funded by Russia, sweep to power in snap elections across several key countries. One by one, they trigger their own versions of Brexit. The European Union, the greatest peace project in human history, dissolves not in a war, but in a flood of algorithmically generated mistrust and paranoia. Russia has not conquered Europe with tanks. It has conquered it with information. It has turned the continent's greatest strength, its open and democratic society, into its most fatal vulnerability. The West is fighting a 20th century war of sanctions and attrition, while Russia is fighting a 21st century war for the control of human consciousness itself. And it is winning.